ultimately, his future career as First Minister is on the line. That's how I'd be focusing on if I was First Minister right now. If I was him in his shoes, I'm going to have to change things up here pretty drastically, or I ain't going to be here much longer. And I just don't get that sense from them just now.
It's quite a good kind of context, actually, to talk about the Inverness by-election, specifically the Inverness South by-election, which Geoff was previewing on the podcast last week to great acclaim on Twitter, by the way, as well, in the aftermath. We've got the Geoffologist, but Twitter loves him. Right, Geoff, do you want to crack on this and sort of sum up what your point is? Worth saying that, in first place was Duncan Macdonald, an independent candidate. In second place, Jonathan Chartier from Scottish Liberal Democrats. And in third place, Gordon Shanks of the Scottish National Party. Yeah,
I'd been very keen to point out the results of local by-elections for some time now. I totally appreciate all the caveats with that. There's lots of local issues at stake that might not reflect national priorities. The turnout's usually a lot lower. I get all that. But these are real people voting. And we've now had a dozen or so local by-elections in all airts and pairts in the country, urban and rural, and they're all showing the same trend. And that trend is against the SNP on this first preferences. And the vote here was down 16%. 16% in a seat that if the SNP are to have any chance of winning this general election in terms of seats, they're going to have to hold on to these types of areas. So there is a huge challenge abroad for them. I think we've got to price in that Labour are going to take a haul of seats in the Central Belt. Okay, how much? We don't know. How many, I should say? We don't know. So if we don't hold on to these types of seats, it's going to be a hugely difficult night for the SNP. It'll be a very, very difficult night for Humza Yousaf. And that might mean a whole different ballgame post-election. So I do think it's important to look at these by-elections and ascertain what we can from them.
I totally understand why Geoff is a little bit gloomy on all of that. I think it's probably justified. There are some caveats. By-elections are by-elections, and by-elections are a little bit different, albeit if the trend is all in the same direction, you have to worry a little bit. Council by-elections are also a little bit problematic because of the system that they use, a single transferable vote. So it can sometimes be difficult to extrapolate that into a first-past-the-post type election. We had Rutherglen, of course, which was a first-past-the-post election and which said similar things to what these council by-elections are saying.
But Andy, I'm talking. Forget the STV system. I'm talking about first preferences.
I know you're talking about first preferences, and I get, and that's why I think there's a lot of validity to what you say. I completely agree. I'm chucking in a couple of potential caveats that might be offered in the other direction. I suppose what polls are certainly trending in a direction, but they are not overwhelming. It's not entirely clear what's going to happen yet. And that is the position that the SNP are in. The SNP might not know for sure how badly they're doing until the day after the general election. As I said the other week, it's nothing like the electorate to smack you in the face to actually realise what is going on. It is likely that things are moving significantly away from them. I think it's still pretty uncertain who's actually going to win this election in Scotland. I don't think it's a fait accompli that Labour are going to win it yet. I'm not convinced they're there. But that is a difficulty for a party which thinks it might be on the slide, is that they might not really know how bad it is until it's happened. And that's difficult. It's difficult to arrest that. They have to look at themselves and say, okay, we've got probably 18 months until the Scottish election. And I think that's the real test of the SNP. I'm not saying this election's not important, this general election, right? It clearly is. Clearly extremely important. But I think the real test of how the SNP is going to move into the future is how, if they have a big reversal in the general election, they've then got 18 months to save their government ahead of Holyrood. And how are they going to do that? Because they cannot sit there and say, everything will be fine, we don't need to make any major change. They are going to have to absolutely rip everything up and start again, or they are screwed.
But that's my point, Andy. That's why I'm so interested in all of these by-election results and more so than I am the polls, in all honesty, because all they give us a sense of is the actual trend over a period of time. It's the real folk voting that interests me.
So why do you think there's no response then, Geoff? What's your take from an internal point of view? Why are they not responding to these results in strategy or anything else?
I'll come to that in a second, but this is the kind of point I've been making. What worried me about the Inverness South result is, as I said, if they can't win seats like that, they ain't winning the general election. If they don't win the general election, it is not feasible, in my view, for Humza Yousaf to continue as First Minister. In which case, the party is going to have to go through an almighty overhaul in any scenario. In which case, 2026 becomes uncharted waters for all of us. So, Andy, you've said enough times on this podcast that, I'm interested in the polls in 2026. I'm not. I couldn't care less. The only poll that really matters is the general election this year, because that is going to determine how and if the SNP continue in its current guise.
But I think, so my reading the situation, and disagree with me, reading the situation, I think the SNP will go into that general election in 6 months or whatever it is, entirely unchanged from where they are right now. I don't see any changes coming at all, strategically, in terms of personnel. I don't see any change coming.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, there was let's say a rumour that the SNP were considering using the general election to jettison the Green Party, and then that would be the change that was required ahead of the 2026 Holyrood election. I think that is wildly optimistic as things stand. If this current trend continues into the general election and the SNP do face a massive reversal, just getting rid of the Greens ain't going to cut it. So these are the sorts of things that I can't understand, given all the discussion we've had in this podcast about the various policy priorities that are facing significant challenges, why there isn't a change in tone, a change in narrative. I'd be fighting right now, if I were Humza Yousaf, as if I've got 4 or 5 months left, right? And then see, when you get into that frame of mind as a politician, you start to strip out the stuff that doesn't matter and you focus on what does. Who am I? What am I going after? Said it many times, and you go after it relentlessly. Core issues, speaking to the people's priorities. For whatever reason, the SNP aren't quite there yet. It's very difficult when you're in government as well. I get that. They're inherited a lot of difficult policies. I get that. But ultimately, his future career as First Minister is on the line. That's how I'd be focusing on if I was First Minister right now. If I was him in his shoes, I'm going to have to change things up here pretty drastically, or I ain't going to be here much longer. And I just don't get that sense from them just now.
Thank you so much for watching. Press subscribe and you'll get all the best videos offering insight on Scottish politics delivered straight to your feed. Press subscribe and stick around. And if you'd like to hear our conversations in full, open up your podcast app and search for Holyrood Sources.